Greetings, Corpse Clubbers, and welcome to a brand new episode of Corpse Club, the official podcast for DailyDead.com. My name is Heather Wixson, and for this week, I am joined by filmmaker David Blue Garcia, as we're going to dive into the brand new Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which is hitting Netflix this weekend. David, thank you so much for joining us.
It's my pleasure, and I'm ready to dive right in.
Yeah, so I have to ask coming into this because this is a franchise that's now, been out there for nearly 50 years. Were you a big fan of the Texas Chainsaw films coming into it, or was this sort of new territory for you to explore?
I was definitely a fan of the first one, and it's one of the more memorable movie-going experiences of my life. I remember it vividly, watching the movie for the first time on cable when I was in middle school and not knowing anything about it. And, this was the days before the internet where you could just look up anything, and I remember watching it and just being fascinated. I didn't know if it was a documentary or what. It just seems so strange and so off to me. And as soon as Leatherface popped out and made his first kill, I was so shocked. I turned the TV off. And I eventually turned the TV on and finished the film, but it was one of those movies I didn't want to watch again. It was just like, it was so terrifying to me. And it wasn't until many years later when I was safe in my late 20s that I revisited it. But it's definitely being from Texas and growing up knowing that film was made here. It's like a source of pride being a Texan, and that, filmmakers around the world, often cited as one of the best horror films ever made. So it's definitely classic.
Yeah, I was going to say, so with that in mind, was it daunting to then come into this and work on a Texas Chainsaw film? Because there is, with franchises, there's always sort of this, they have this legacy, and, I don't know if you know this, but horror fans, we can be a little persnickety when it comes to new films.
I've noticed.
Heaven forbid you shoot a movie outside of the place that takes place. Yeah. Like, I'm originally from Illinois. I've gotten so used to Halloween movies not ever being shot in Illinois that right. I'm like, wherever, it doesn't matter if you make a good movie. Right. But I'm just curious, was that kind of like, oh wow, I'm doing this, and this is something that I know, there's going to be a legion of fans who are going to really be, indulging in this.
Yeah, I mean, you want to make something great for the fans, something that they're going to enjoy. I mean, you're never going to recapture the original. I mean, I'm never going to be as shocked ever again as I was when I first saw the first movie, So we all want that feeling again, and some of us have just seen too much to ever get it again, get that hit. But I want to make something that honors the original and that also reinvigorates the franchise and introduces it to a new generation, because it's such a great story, and Leatherface is such a great and iconic character who spawned a whole bunch of copycat characters over the years. I want new fans to find this movie, and then hopefully they go back and they watch the first one too, for some of these young people who haven't even seen the first one. So I'd like it to inspire people. And, being from Texas, I wanted to live up to that legacy, and I'm happy to join the legacy of Texan filmmakers who have helmed this franchise: Tobe Hooper, Kim Henkel, and now me. A lot of the filmmakers have been foreigners as of late. So it's nice to bring a Texan back to the director's chair.
Well, I was going to ask, because I know Kim is still with us, and I had the pleasure of actually chatting with him years ago when I used to work for a distribution company, because we were working on one of the films that he had written. And this was early 2010s. And he was just a delight. And I'm just curious, did he give you any sort of input, sort of like a rah-rah speech or something to kind of set you off when you got into the directorial chair for this and, decided to, I don't want to say decided to, but you sort of paved your way with this film?
I mean, absolutely. I mean, when I got the go ahead to take on this project, my phone didn't stop ringing for a couple of days. And one of the first calls I got was from Kim Henkel. And, I was just in shock, by the way, when I got the project. And to hear Kim Henkel, the writer of the original film, on the other end of the line, he's got that Texas drawl, that he never lost. And, just to hear him, give me his support, he said anything I needed, he'd be there, any questions I had. And he was someone I could text or call anytime during the shoot and just kind of pick his brain, which was great.
Oh, that's awesome to hear. I have to imagine that probably made it a little bit easier too, coming into it, like having sort of you know what I mean? Like sort of having his vote of confidence and his input, because,
Right.
again, it's, like you're a Texan filmmaker making a Texas Chainsaw Massacre movie. Like, holy cow, that's pretty bananas.
It was bananas. And he had he had lots of ideas and great notes. And I was able to look through those and just, bring some of that into the character. So
that's awesome. So I'm curious, because I wanted to say, like, this movie is gorgeous. It's just absolutely gorgeous. And I think you did visually, it's phenomenal. And what I love about the Texas Chainsaw movies in particular is, like, regardless of whatever your feelings are in any of them, it's funny, for as grisly as these movies are, they're so beautiful. And I think you did a really great job of sort of living up to that expectation of, like, wow, this is really stunning. Like, there's a few scenes where, like, you could stop it and it'd be like an amazing thing to sort of amazing photo to put on your wall. And I just was really taken aback by some of the visuals. And I'm curious, because I know you have a cinematography background. Was it easy then to come into this and find ways to kind of bring that experience into this to really capture sort of the aesthetics of what this film is? Hopefully that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely, want to extend credit to Rick Diaz, who was my cinematographer on this film, and someone who's also a fellow Texan that grew up in South Texas, and he and I met in film school at the University of Texas in Austin. And so it was great to have two sets of Texas eyes kind of scrutinizing over those frames. But as having a background in cinematography, you always use, as a director, you always use your skill set, so cinematography is something that comes naturally to me, coming up with striking images and compositions and seeing things and setting up the camera quickly. So, it was always in my mind that, to honor the original, because it is like you said, a beautiful film, very saturated, rich color palette, wide Texas landscapes, as well as, like, hot claustrophobic scenes as well. So, he and I set out to make something that was kind of like elevated Grindhouse. We wanted it to be beautiful, but also kind of gritty and kind of messy and kind of, handheld at times. So we wanted it to be a mix of those two styles. And I was constantly looking for, what can be like an iconic image, something that's going to stick in someone's mind, something that's a little bit different. And so I think in the trailer, we used the shot of Leatherface center punched in the frame, rising up in the sunflower field with the Texas quotes landscape in the background. So those kind of frames came naturally to me.
Yeah, it is interesting, because what I liked about this too is, again, it feels very Texas Chainsaw, but it also feels a little bit different, which is good. I think that's a good thing. And I, especially in terms of visuals, you mentioned sort of like bringing some new visuals to it, like the bus scene in particular. I can't even imagine, like, the difficulties of shooting that, because it's like you have that, like, hard blue light. It's so claustrophobic. There's so many people and so many moving parts. Like, how on earth did you guys tackle that? Because that, to me, was like, I watched that sequence last night and I was like, this is ridiculous, but in the best possible way.
Yeah. So, I mean, I wanted to, like, the original film is very, very Texas. It was shot, it was contemporary to its time, but obviously now it feels like a period piece because it's very 1970s Texas. And, there's lots of browns of the landscape and kind of drab colors and things like that. And that's how we started this film. We started with the warm hues and the big skies and the landscapes. And then we start to squeeze the frame, and we're starting to get tighter and tighter and tighter and more claustrophobic, to the point where we're in the orphanage, we're under a bed, we're in a crawl space, and then we're in a bus. And to me, the bus was that sequence where Leatherface essentially meets 2020. I mean, he was in 1974 were the events of the original film, and he's kind of lived in seclusion in this small Texas town for a long time. So he hasn't really seen how the world has been passing by. And so I wanted the bus to be an abrupt visual contrast and culture clash, bringing Leatherface, essentially time traveling him into the future. And that's his first, real experience with future people. So that's why I went, strong with that blue light. I wanted to feel like Euphoria or something like that. And I think it's a great scene and a really great visual example of the culture clash between Leatherface and the hipsters.
No, definitely. And as somebody who kind of watches like the social clashings that happen online these days in terms of the different generations, I'm Gen X, so I'm kind of stuck in the middle of all of it. Right. So it's kind of like seeing the older folks fighting with the younger folks. I'm just like, oh, okay. It's like everybody just calmed down a little bit. But I thought it was interesting because, as much as this is a really fun horror movie, it does bring up a lot of interesting points in terms of, sort of the idealism that comes from being, either younger millennials or, older Gen Z folks, and wanting to have like, building sort of a better existence, but like, what does that actually mean? Like, it's like, it goes beyond just like having an auction in basically a deserted town. And then you also have sort of this old, sort of this, kind of traditional life in terms of, these folks are like watching their towns being sold off and, Leatherface getting his life disrupted. Was that fun for you to kind of do something that, again, it's a super fun horror movie, but also it's got something on its mind as well?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's something the writers were thinking about a lot, gentrification being kind of top of mind, something that's happening a lot. And this is sort of a tale of reverse gentrification, which is something we saw during the pandemic, where there was this kind of mass exodus of urbanites to the rural areas of the country. So you get this culture clash of these big city folk with all the money coming in, buying up properties and buying up towns. In many ways, it feels like that's happening even here in Austin, over the last couple of years. So it's something it's interesting culturally to explore. And I think it's a great kind of allegory with Leatherface at the center.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I wanted to ask too, because the cast is fantastic, but I was so excited to see Alice Krige in this because I've been a huge fan of hers pretty much like almost the entirety of my horror fandom because of Ghost Story. But I wanted to talk about Mark in this because there's such an interesting physicality to the character of Leatherface, because he is sort of this big lumbering physical presence.
Yeah.
But he's had a lot to deal with in a way that we haven't really seen with a lot of the other iconic horror villains. And I was curious if you talk about working with him on this character, because there is this inherent sadness. And I just thought there was something really striking about the way he presented this character that we've all known for decades now, but again, just in a way that, like, without saying anything, really, you just get a real sense of where he is.
Yeah. I mean, when I came in, he had really prepared for this role, and, I trusted him to take it where he needed to take it, and encouraged him. I think what he did by creating a character that jumps out beyond the mask is something very difficult for an actor to do. And it's easy to say like, oh, he's just wearing a mask. Like, there's nothing to it. But I mean, Mark is doing so much behind the mask, and with his physicality and the way he moves and the choices he made, that, I was really impressed by him. And, I gave him an assignment. He wasn't aware that, I wanted him to do the dance, at the end of the film, the infamous Leatherface dance. He worked on that for a few weeks, and he'd send me clips and things that he was recording, but I didn't even care. Like, I didn't want to watch them. I didn't want to know, because I just wanted to be surprised, because that's how the first one was shot. I think Gunnar Hansen just sort of improvised that in a so almost a fit of rage, just because the production was so difficult and so hard to endure. He just sort of like did that,
Yeah.
and they filmed it. And, so I just wanted Mark to kind of express himself too. And I remember we did one take of it, and I shot it with 2 cameras, and I said, all right, we got it. So I just think he's a great guy, and I can't wait for people to see his Leatherface.
Yeah, no, it's interesting too, because, I again, it's, horror fans have quote unquote opinions a lot. And I know that there was some sort of like, they were trying to figure out the face and the mask. And I just thought, again, it's one of those, like, when you watch like the original, like Texas Chainsaw movies, like the first couple, like Leatherface sort of dons these masks, just, we don't really get a sense of the history of them.
Uh-huh.
And I just thought the meaning behind the mask for this movie in particular was really striking. And again, was one of those where I was just like, oh, like, how am I feeling for this character, even though he's like completely obliterating anybody in his path. And it was just one of those, like, was it hard to make sure that component was going to resonate on levels that were just beyond sort of the visual of it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was important for us for Leatherface to have, a reason to go on this rampage. And once he has that reason, the movie kind of goes and just doesn't stop. But we wanted to be careful not to humanize him too much as well. Although that's just going to happen naturally because of the way the story is told and some of the scenes that are depicted. But I think Mark did a great job of walking that line between human and monster, and we do want to maintain that, Leatherface is a monstrous human, and he's not a good person. So.
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, the thing is, it's like, yeah, he's doing horrible things. He's also kind of a product of a really messed up situation too, where you kind of wonder, like, would he be doing all of this if he didn't have the upbringing that he did? But
yes.
that's not nearly as fun to ponder as, where does he get all his faces?
Exactly.
Well, I wanted to talk about the effects in this because I'm a big nerd for special effects stuff. I've been that's sort of been my wheelhouse for quite a while in my career. And I know how challenging it is whenever you're doing practical effects in a movie, because it takes time and, and setups and things like that. And you have to make sure it's going to work in camera and that you light it the right way and everything like that. But you have some really super gnarly and fun kills in this movie. And some gags where I actually gasped, which isn't an easy thing to pull off, because I feel like I almost see everything, you gotta go, oh, okay, I've seen this before. How was it for you in terms of embracing the violence of this? Because it goes hard. And that's interesting too, because the original isn't nearly as hard of a movie as people necessarily think it is. So I always find it's interesting that I feel like we almost have to amp things up because of audiences' expectations these days. When you, in retrospect, 50 years ago, audiences were terrified almost by the suggestion of violence.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Now we're so desensitized that you just really got to take it to that next level. And when I watched Fede Alvarez's Evil Dead, I was like, oh my God, this guy is fucking crazy. And so when I signed on to this movie, I knew what kind of movie I was supposed to be making. And I remember my first day on set, I killed one of the characters off. We did a little bit of a death scene, and Fede watched the dailies, and he gave me a call the next day, and he's like, hey, listen, like, good job on that, but I want you to reshoot it. Okay. And I want you to keep in mind that you need to shock the audience, and you need to put more blood. And once you think you've got enough blood, I want you to put more. So like, that was kind of his direction. And he sort of talked me and taught me about kills and about shooting with practical effects. And once I got the message, I just had so much fun working with the special effects teams and working with the visual effects teams on figuring out how to do these kills. Because some of them, are just really, I think, like you said, they stick in your mind. So it was a lot of fun to do that and to play with like blood cannons and squibs and prosthetics and hiding the camera in a way so that you're hiding the trick it's really just a big magic trick. It was a really fun challenge.
Excellent. I'm glad you brought up Fede too, because, you know, I know producing this and, you know, and everything and sort of being the steward of it, like how invaluable was it to be able to have his input for you then to come into this? Because, you know, again, it is a pretty daunting premise on its own. But he's kind of been through this before, you know, with Evil Dead. So I'm guessing being able to sort of pick his brain from time to time ended up making things a little bit easier for you in terms of what you set out to achieve on your own.
Yeah, it's great. Like once Fede, you know, once I had his confidence and he was, you know, he brought me on board. He just kind of, you know, downloaded me on a little bit of his experience rebooting Evil Dead, and you know, he's been in the hot seat before. You know, he did a short film, and then he had to reboot this, you know, precious classic. So you know, it was a similar experience, and he gave me some great pep talks, and you know, talked to me about the story. We went through page by page on the screenplay and just talked about everything in the script before I got to set, and just had, you know, nightly powwows, meetings, phone calls, whatever. You know, and at some point, you know, he kind of just let me direct the film, which was great. And then we would get back together like in the editing room, and just, he's a master editor too, you know, which is filmmaking really, is horror filmmaking is creating things in edits and, you know, drawing out the suspense. It's all about the timing. I mean, just one or two frames can make or break a moment. So also learning from him in the editing room was really great.
Oh, that's awesome. What I wanted to ask about too, you know, because, you know, you're dealing with, you know, you guys went out to make this movie, you know, and dealing with COVID and everything like that. Like there's already so much about this film that seems like a huge challenge because there's, you know, ambitious effects. You've got, you know, a lot of moving parts with the cast and things like that. Did because of the nature of COVID and sort of the nature of the story, do you feel like that heightened maybe the story that you guys are telling here, because it is sort of this group of people being isolated into this small town? And did that sort of present any unique challenges that you hadn't maybe expected coming into it, but sort of had to learn to embrace along the way?
Yeah, I mean, you know, a lot of people have been filming in COVID, and we were one of the productions filming right in the middle of the pandemic. You know, and we took all the safety precautions, and everyone was testing, and everyone was clean, and masks all the times and stuff like that. Once you get past that stuff, I mean, I really don't think it was that hard. I mean, it's just filmmaking is filmmaking, you know. I think some of the more difficult moments came when I had to shoot on the bus, for instance, and COVID protocols required us to clear the bus, disinfect it, and air it out every 30 minutes or something like that.
Oh my gosh.
So, yeah. So, I mean, I'd get in there, I'd finally get all the extras and all the stunt people and the cameras and everyone on the bus. I'd rehearse and then time it out or whatever. I'd get one take and then it'd be like, all right, cut, clear the bus. We gotta reset, you know? And I just feel like, oh man, I can't get any momentum in here. So that was the hard part, was clearing those little sets just for safety. Another one was just, you know, when you're wearing masks, you can't really see anyone's face. You don't know what they're thinking sometimes. And so, and I'm a very sarcastic person. I'm very dry. And I usually signal that with a little bit like of a smile or something like that, but no one could see what the hell I was saying or what I was doing. So a lot of my sarcastic comments were taken seriously, especially by Bulgarian crew. I don't even think they're sarcastic at all over there. So like one story I remember in particular is there's a scene where the chainsaw hits a sewage pipe under the house, and the pipe breaks open and shit pours out all over one of our characters. And so the Bulgarians, they had brought me a bucket of shit to approve. And I was like, it looks good, but it needs more corn. And I thought that was a funny joke. But they didn't think it was a joke, and they brought back another bucket of shit full of corn. And I had to say that I was sorry, but I was just joking and I wanted no corn. So yeah. Anyway, that's the story. That's what it was like filming in COVID.
The magic of making movies.
Yeah.
Well, I know we're already getting close on time, but I wanted to ask because, I'm a really big believer, that whenever you do something creative, obviously you put something of yourself into it, but you also take something away from it, whether it's something that sort of affects you personally or professionally, or maybe it's sort of a combination of both. But I'm curious, looking at your experiences working on this film and being now part of the Texas Chainsaw franchise and, getting to collaborate with Fede and, working with Kim, like what has been like, first of all, it's all mind blowing to me, but I'm curious, what has been your biggest takeaway from all of this?
That's a really great question. And I don't know if I've really thought of an answer for that particular question. It's an amazing opportunity. And something that I learned is that, the opportunity didn't come out of a vacuum. I was helped by so many people along the way, and, just hundreds and hundreds of people, if you really think about it. So I've been very fortunate. And I think I had made my first film, Tejano, and it came out on HBO. And I didn't know if that was the end. I didn't know if there was going to be any other films coming at me, and the right people saw the movie and they brought me on. So I'm just very glad and I'm very happy about that. Glad they gave me a shot.
Awesome. Do you feel like if everything goes right with this and, the release goes well and everybody sort of is excited for it, do you feel like you'd want to come back and revisit Leatherface if the opportunity would present itself?
Yeah. Considering that, I came onto this project in a unique way, to say the least. I have a lot of ideas that were left on the cutting room floor that I didn't get to put in the film, or things I've come up with after, so too late to utilize them. So it'd be great to do another one of these things and continue the story.
Yeah, I was really surprised by this story, and then I really liked where it led. And I'm really hoping that we get a little bit more, because I think there's something really fascinating about this world that you guys have created for Leatherface in sort of present day.
Right.
Because it's such a juxtaposition from when we first meet him all those decades ago. So I'm hopeful for you guys.
Yeah. I also have just like a lot of just like Texan regionalist ideas that I would like to bring to the film, because Texas is so different now. It's, most of us live in big cities and they're very diverse culturally and stuff. So there's a lot to explore. Yeah,
definitely. Well, David, thank you so much for chatting with us today. And for those of you listening, thanks so much for supporting Corpse Club. You can find out more about us over at corpseclub.com. And for all your daily news, reviews, and interviews, you can head over to dailydead.com. Thank you to our engineer, Brian, for making us sound great. And until next time, everybody, stay scary.